Hello, everybody. Welcome to the introductory session for the UBS Introduction to Finance and Investment Banking workshop. My name is Knoton, and today we're going to be talking about the investment banking and financial services industry as a whole and the strategies that students at UCLA use to land internship offers. We're going to be talking about the organizations and resources that you have at UCLA here as a UCLA student. And this workshop is going to be divided up into three main sessions. So the first session will be the introductory session. The second session will go over why investment banking, so why people choose to pursue a career in the industry or not, understanding what bankers do so you could sort of inform that decision for yourself, and learning about the industry landscape as a whole in terms of what firms are out there. And then in the third session and final session, we're going to be talking about just exactly how students break into banking. We're going to be talking about the recruiting timeline and the key factors that lead to successful recruiting. So, in terms of my background, so why am I sort of qualified to walk through this process and talk about investment banking and finance from the perspective of an undergrad at UCLA? Well, I think just to introduce myself more and give a little bit more context on where I'm coming from. I am majoring in economics as a fourth year here at UCLA. And for the past few years, I've been very involved on campus. So I've done a lot of work within Bruin Value Investing, which is one of the finance clubs that we have here, and the Undergraduate Business Society. So that's UBS, which is the club that this session is being organized through. And in terms of my background, I am still am the vice president of education for BVI, which means I'm responsible for training, new joiners for the club. I was the committee director for the investment banking workshop in my junior year, and I'm going to expand a little bit more on what that is in future sessions. And in terms of my experience in the industry, I did a capital markets internship at Morgan Stanley, and then this past summer I was at JP Morgan doing investment banking. So I've had some time to work in the industry. I've had some time to explore the clubs here at UCLA, and I've also hosted a few workshops, like a finance workshop with International Bruins in Business, and I also organized several programs for underclassmen in BVI. But I mean, the bottom line is, throughout the years, I've seen hundreds of students go through the recruiting process. I was very involved as a sophomore. I helped a lot of people in the class of 2027 as a junior, and so I'm getting ready to support the class of 2028. And I also wanted to take that further by helping the class of 2029, which is a lot of you guys, by talking about everything that I wish that I knew when I was in your shoes. So, just for a bit of context, I've also helped students, outside of UCLA as well. I was mentors for a lot of these people, in Barnard or UT Texas, the University of Texas at Austin, at Cornell, at Michigan, as well as the people that I met at UCLA. So, I've had a lot of experience with seeing people recruit and the factors that led to successful or unsuccessful recruiting. And to expand a little bit on why I started this program in the first place, in April of this year, so this was my junior year, an incoming freshman asked to chat with me. And so this was before he even committed to UCLA, but he asked to chat with me because he was interested in recruiting for banking. And during that conversation, I realized that there were a lot of things that I was saying that I feel like many people could benefit from. And there were a lot of points where I was like repeating myself and sort of saying the same thing. So I felt like running this session and also having recording for future people to use and learn from was something that could be valuable. So with that in mind, I hope that all of you listen, engage, and participate, and really think critically about what we're talking about here to determine whether it's the right path for you. And I think another important point to sort of throw out there is that recruiting has a lot of facets, right? There's a lot of things to think about. It can be quite complicated at times, especially when you're, an incoming freshman or, you're just starting out your first year. So my goal is to break it down and make it a little bit easier to understand. So I think with that, it's very important to establish what is finance. So what is this thing that we talk about when we refer to finance, right? So at the most fundamental level, as you can see in this chart here, the financial services industry is the intermediary between capital So what we usually think of as money, although there's a bit of a broader definition, and the factors of production. So the factors of production, meaning like labor, when people work, land, the physical place that people work on, and entrepreneurship, which is sort of that act of creating new businesses and using, other factors to create value in the world. And so financial institutions, so things like banks or credit unions or brokerage firms, or on the other side, you also have like, venture capital firms, private equity firms. These are like investment firms. They sort of serve as that intermediary between these factors of production and determine how capital is spent in our economy, right? So you can see here, right? One example is like a venture capital firm. Maybe they take the money that they have from investors and they invest in startups. And so that's one way that we, in the financial services industry, allocate capital. Or maybe you have like an asset manager that like provides money for a property development for land, or like Bank of America providing workers with mortgages and credit cards and things like that. And so that's kind of the bigger picture on finance as a whole. And in this session, we're going to talk about investment banking specifically because it's seen as a very good gateway into careers in finance, like private equity or hedge funds or venture capital. So, what is investment banking? So, this is something that we're going to expand upon in future sessions. But right now, I think we can sort of establish this definition based on the product groups and the coverage group. So, what is a product group? I think that this is probably one of the easiest ways to understand what bankers do, essentially by dividing them into these groups. And for a product group, that's something like mergers and acquisitions, for example. So with mergers and acquisitions, that is where you're going to be helping companies advise, helping to advise companies when they want to buy other companies or maybe sell themselves. And so that's one service that investment bankers provide. Another service is like capital markets. So if you take like equity capital markets, for example, that is like when you help bring a company onto the stock market. So you help them say like maybe sell like 40% of themselves in terms of shares and put that on the open market so that they can raise money and maybe they can use that to buy a factory or expand their operations. So you can sort of see that it is helping businesses access investments, helping businesses thrive. By taking them through these often complex financial transactions that can sometimes be critical to their survival. And another way to think about it is you can think about investment banking in terms of coverage groups. So coverage groups means like an industry group. So what does that mean? So let's say that you are a healthcare investment banker. So if you're a healthcare investment banker, that means you're going to be working with healthcare companies specifically, right? And the reason they divide that is because you can develop specific expertise by working in particular groups. So, a healthcare banker might work on a deal with like Novartis, or maybe they'll work on a deal with Dexcom. So these are like healthcare companies, or like United Health, right? These bankers specialize in particular industries, and you could be a healthcare banker across different products. So maybe like you're a healthcare banker that does like M&A and DCM, or debt capital markets, or ECM, or equity capital markets. Or maybe you're an M&A banker that does like technology deals or healthcare deals or consumer deals. So I think that's kind of an easy way to understand initially at a very high level what investment banking is and what that involves. And so, why might that be interesting to you? So, why is it interesting to help companies buy or sell themselves or help them raise debt or equity? There are a couple of key factors here. So, when we think about investment banking, and you work on these very complex financial transactions, that means that you work on complex financial models, right? And you do a lot of interesting analysis, and you work a lot in investment banking because these are very demanding deals. People tend to work very long hours in the industry, and so you develop very strong technical skills. And this is very highly sought after by employers, right? So people often go into investment banking with the intention of just learning really, really solid technical skills, and they can use that in whatever career path they decide to choose afterwards, right? And if you are curious about businesses, if you're curious about industries, if you want to develop expertise in a particular sector, investment banking can be a really great way to do that, especially if you work in a coverage group. And in a coverage group, that again is like an industry group. So if you work in like technology investment banking for 6 years, for example, you would probably develop like a very good understanding of how that industry works, specifically from that financial perspective. And you can develop pretty extensive knowledge, and that is something that can be very valuable because people may seek you out for your advice since you've worked in that industry for so long. And I think another thing, a little bit more high level, is when you work in finance, and not just investment banking specifically, you come to understand how capital moves in the world and where true wealth comes from. Right. And so true wealth comes from equity, which means like owning something kind of rather than having a high salary. So if you think about some of the most wealthy people in the world, like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Larry Ellison, they have a lot of wealth, not because they have a high salary necessarily, but because they have a lot of stock in something. They have a lot of ownership of something. And so you kind of understand that wealth comes from equity. You understand the way that capital moves, and how that capital is managed. And if you're someone who's really curious and you want to understand how the world works, I would argue that finance is a pretty great avenue through which to explore that question. And on top of that, I think elephant in the room, a lot of people will think about the compensation that you receive in investment banking. So, as I alluded to earlier, investment bankers work very long hours, but in turn, the compensation is quite high. So, as it stands in 2025, most investment bankers will have a base salary of 110,000 to maybe 120,000, and they have a bonus that is, often somewhere between 50 to 100% of their base. So, in this chart on your left, you can see that this is salary based on a hypothetical 65% of a base salary. So you can see, if you work at a kind of investment bank called a bulge bracket, which I'll explain in session two, you could make, 180K hypothetically as a first year investment banking analyst. And then if you worked at an elite boutique, another category that I'm going to talk about in more detail, you could make, maybe even 200K, right? And so this far exceeds like typical salaries, as you can see, based on like median income or even household income in the United States. And, this is very, very good, especially for a UCLA grad who is expected to make, I believe, around, 54, maybe 60K after graduation. And I think something that's also really interesting to point out is that 10 years after graduation, a UCLA alum in the 75th percentile of earnings is expected to make 170K a year around. And that is still less than what you make as a first year investment banking analyst. So you can sort of see here that compensation in the industry is very high, and it can be even higher in similar industries in finance like private equity. So now that we have that in mind, that we know like what is investment banking, why you might be interested, I think it's also important to talk about what resources are available here at UCLA that you can use to not only learn more about this industry, but also find your way into it, right? So first off, I think we have, the clubs. I'm sure this is very top of mind for a lot of you that are applying to the clubs right now. And there are four main ones at UCLA. So there is BAM, which is Bruin Asset Management, BVI, which is Bruin Value Investing, Bruin Hedge Fund, or BHF, and BIT, which is the Bruin Investment and Trading Group. So right now is the heat of recruiting season for these clubs. They kick off very, very soon, like in week one or, between the week one and week three of fall quarter and also winter quarter. And the reason they do this so early is because they really want to capture the talent. They want to beat out the other clubs for picking out the best candidates, and they want to, take advantage of a very like enthusiastic group of freshmen that are just really eager to get involved, right? So there's a lot of recruiting going on right now in these first few weeks of the school year. And in terms of UBS, which is sort of like an umbrella organization that oversees all these clubs, and I can expand on that in later slides. They host like a career fair and they have very useful workshops like the career development workshop and like workshops for learning Excel skills. Another big resource that UCLA has is something called the Investment Banking Workshop. So, this is a program run by UBS, and its aim is to take around 35 or so of the top students at UCLA and place them into top investment banks by running information sessions and helping to like push out resume books. And this program usually sees placement into the industry above like 95%, so almost everybody, into some of the top firms on Wall Street. The UCLA Alumni Association also runs something called the Sharp Fellows Program, and that's something that is helpful for students that want to pursue careers in investment banking or consulting or technology. And they organize a trek or like a trip to New York for their investment banking cohort to meet investment bankers. And so that is something that's quite valuable as well. But I think the most valuable thing that you will encounter are definitely your upperclassmen and your peers. So I really encourage you all to reach out to people, seek out mentors. And by finding people in the business community, you can really find connection and find people that are going to take you through the process that they themselves went through and offer really great advice to you. And so with that in mind, I think the most prescient or the most important thing that a lot of people are thinking about is, okay, how do we get into these clubs? So I'm going to talk about each club in greater detail. So Bruin Asset Management is one of the strongest finance orgs on campus. They have a pretty strong focus on like community and like social fit. And, they place very, very well into super competitive internships in, investment banking and private equity. I think they're known for having, a very good like social culture, but also being very, very focused on placing members into the best roles in finance, and they place very, very well. So in terms of the process, I think this is honestly similar, if not like identical across the board. There's going to be an information session where they talk about the clubs. They have a written application that's due on the same day. They have coffee chats, which are informal sort of behavioral rounds of interviews where they get to know you as a person. They don't really ask you technicals in these generally. And then there are final interviews, which have technical questions relating to finance. Um, and you can see this is all happening, very early this month. And so the process moves quickly. In terms of, their size, they have around 40 active members, founded in 2014, and they placed at firms like JP Morgan, in New York, or Goldman Sachs in San Francisco, or, Blackstone in New York. So this is clearly a very strong club. And you can see some of the key members here that make up the club's executive board. Bruin value investing, in my opinion, the best one, although I will say I'm biased because I'm a part of this club. But yeah, we are the oldest finance club on campus, founded in 2012, around the same number of active members with a very strong focus on learning about value investing, but we're more specifically growth at a reasonable price. In terms of the application process, also very, very similar to the other clubs. There is an info session, a written application, and in terms of recent placements, it's also been very, very strong. We place people in Goldman Sachs in New York or Lazard, and we have placement across firms like JP Morgan and UBS and Bank of America, with a lot of our students landing on the West Coast as well as New York as well. And you can see here the key members with myself included. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm responsible for training students, incoming freshmen or incoming, um, people into the club. And so it's been a great experience and I can't recommend it enough. Next club that we have here is Bruin Hedge Fund, top finance club at UCLA. They have a couple of key pillars that they focus on, which is just namely mentorship, stock pitches, and networking, and also their case competition. So they're known for hosting a case competition with Houlihan Lokey, which is a local investment bank. And they have a very similar, profile in terms of like very strong placements. So there are some students that placed at Goldman Sachs in Los Angeles, some at Moelis and Company in New York, a student at JP Morgan in Chicago. So very, very strong placement, very, very strong club overall. And then finally, you have BIT, which is the Bruin Investment and Trading Group. And so they are special because they focus only on investment banking, whereas the other clubs, there are some people that do like buy side, which is like private equity, some that do other, career paths. But BIT's stated focus is to place people into investment banks. And so they do that pretty well. They put some members in like Centerview in New York, Morgan Stanley in San Francisco, Perella Weinberg Partners in LA. And so they do very well overall as a club. But that's not to say that those are the only clubs that are available at UCLA that can help you break into investment banking. So one that I personally am quite a fan of, I know quite a few people in, is Scholars of Finance. So Scholars of Finance is a national organization, and so UCLA here has a chapter. And so they recently launched like their own investment banking workshop, and they have a recruiting boot camp. And they were able to place people in companies like Moelis and Company, JP Morgan, Doucera Partners, Bruins in finance and banking. They used to be called Bruin Capital Management and then rebranded. And they're also known for, having some placements as well So they ask new members to complete an accelerator program. They do investment pitches and M&A simulations, and they've placed into banks like Barclays or UBS or BMO Capital Markets. And then you also have Delta Sigma Pi, which is a business fraternity here at UCLA. And so they have quite a strong network of alumni, and they've recently placed people into firms like Blackstone and PWP. And so it's quite viable to recruit for banking from business frat like DSP as well. Um, Another thing that may be a little bit surprising is the consulting clubs. And so UCLA has quite a few very, very strong consulting clubs. And so although they're, obviously not explicitly focused on recruiting for investment banking, clubs like U Consulting or the Bruin Group have placed very, very well. So some members have gone to firms like Guggenheim Partners or JP Morgan or Moelis and Company or PJT New York. That's also a path that a lot of students choose to go down as well. So, with that being said, where does UBS or the Undergraduate Business Society fit into all this? So, like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like an umbrella organization that oversees the clubs and manages a lot of things between them, right? So, they host events in which all the clubs come out. They host the investment banking workshop, in which students from the four main finance clubs try to filter into that. And they are the largest organization on campus. I think a very old one too. Founded I believe in the 90s. And they are divided into a few committees, right? So they have the Career Development Committee, Consulting, Financial Services, Leadership Development, Public Relations, Technology, and our focus, which is investment banking. So I am on the investment banking committee, and that's where I fit in into UBS, right? And so there is a president, a VP. There are things called development managers, and as freshmen, you will likely join on as committee members if you are selected to, be a part of UBS. But it's not necessary. You don't necessarily have to be like a committee member on UBS to benefit from UBS. And I think one of the best ways to interact with UBS is to sign up for the newsletter, which is on their website, and through that you can get exposed to a lot of good opportunities that are out there. So in terms of how to break into the clubs, the process is quite defined and relatively consistent across the different clubs. So every major finance organization, so those are the top four, BAM, BVI, BHF, and BIT, have a process that can be broken down into four components. So there's the information session, the written application, the coffee chats, and the final interview. So with the info session, this is where the clubs introduce themselves and give freshmen and sophomores a sense of what they're all about and what they're looking for. In the written application, most of the times applicants have to write about why do they want to join that specific club. Sometimes they have to pitch a stock in their written application. And one thing to note is that these applications are not rolling, so they're not rolling. So you should only submit them when you're ready, and so there's not necessarily a benefit in submitting them early. So submit your apps when you know that they're looking good and you know that they are in solid shape. And then if you pass the written application stage, you get onto the coffee chat stage, which is where you kind of partake in informal and behavioral interviews in which you are asked non-technical questions. So in my coffee chats, I got questions like, oh, like what are your hobbies? What do you like to do outside of work? And sometimes you get bizarre questions like, if you could be a fruit, what fruit would you be? Or, if you're like an animal, what animal would you be? And so those are the kinds of things that they ask to sort of gauge whether they think that the candidate has like good social fit for the club. And then after coffee chats, you get to the final interview process. And so these are anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes, and candidates are asked a combination of behavioral and technical questions. And every part of this process is going to be expanded upon, and I'm going to talk about this in more detail. So, with that club interview or that final interview, I think that's something that's on a lot of people's minds. So, in terms of how that works, that's usually divided into behavioral questions, market questions, and technical questions. So this is not necessarily the same format across all clubs. So maybe some clubs will have less of an emphasis on the market questions. But overall, you can expect behavioral questions, which are questions like, tell me about yourself, or like, why are you interested in our club specifically? Or like, why are you interested in finance as like a sector? Market questions might be like, can you tell me about a piece of news that happened in the markets? Can you pitch me a stock, or what's an industry that you're following? Then you also have technical questions like, what are the three financial statements, or like what are the three valuation methodologies? And then you have more specific ones like accounting questions, like walk me through a $10 increase in depreciation. So, for a little bit of context on myself, um, this question, walk me through a $10 increase in depreciation, was probably the question that made me not make it into the clubs when I applied as a freshman in the fall. So I got into BVI in the winter, the second time around, and I thought that I prepared enough for the technicals, but when I got asked $10 depreciation, kind of broke down, wasn't really able to answer the question properly, and so I think that's ultimately what led me to not get a spot. So very important to make sure that you practice those technical questions. And the way to do that is through studying the guides that I'm going to talk about in future slides. In terms of that written application, I think one thing that's very, very, very important, I want to emphasize this, cannot emphasize this enough, is having a well-formatted resume. So as you can see on screen, this resume is a template that I built out. It's very clearly delineated with these lines. There's no pictures on it. There's no blue text. There's no underlines. So it's just like in the correct formatting that we're looking for these resumes here. The city, the state, the dates, the roles, the companies, it's correctly listed in the right spot. Um, and it's okay if you don't have internships. I think the majority of people don't. As first years or sophomores, it's very typical to not have a ton of experience. So we're not looking for people with like finance internships already, although that can be a plus. What we're really looking for is just evidence that you've done a lot of stuff, or you were really involved when you were in high school, right? So maybe you were a teaching assistant, maybe you did volunteering, maybe you started like a small business or started a club. That's the kind of stuff that we want to see in your resume. We want to make sure that it's well formatted. So having the correct format is very, very important. And this is a template that I'm going to send out after the session. So honestly, if you just want to use that template straight and just copy from that, I think that's honestly the way to go, because there isn't a ton of room for variation here. And you want to make sure that your resume is well formatted, because that's a very important element of forming like a positive impression overall as a candidate. And in terms of the written application itself, beyond the resume, so your written application will include your resume as well, but you also have to include some essays that you write. And one of the most common questions is like, why do you want to join this club? So why do you want to join BAM? Why do you want to join BVI? I think one way that I like to approach this question personally is by talking about the conversations that you've had with people in the club. So if you decide to reach out to people for coffee chats, or you meet them at the information session, you can be like, I talked to XYZ and they said, XYZ about the club. And because of that, that really resonated with me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can say, because of these reasons, I think that I'm a great fit for the club, and the club is a great fit for me. And so I think it's really important to emphasize that mutual fit between you and the organization, because that streak goes both ways, right? And then you'll often have like a pitch me a stock question. So I think this is probably one of the most common questions I get about the written application, but I always emphasize to students that it's not that deep. In that, like, we're not looking for professional level analyses with like a full model built out. We know that you are still first years, so we want to be realistic about our expectations. But we do want to see clarity of thought and conciseness. So if your thesis is like succinctly written, if there's good quantitative and qualitative detail, I think that's a good thing. We just want to see that you're putting in effort, and it doesn't necessarily need to be super, super complicated. I think in this day and age, it's very, very tempting to use ChatGPT. But I would really advise against that. I think it's very easy to tell when something is written by chat. So make sure to try and like write your essays on your own. And when you're copy and pasting essays between the clubs, and that's honestly totally fine, because the clubs are very similar in a lot of ways, and I'm sure I was guilty of copy and pasting my applications, between the clubs. Make sure to change the name of the club, because we see very often that essays come into BVI, for example, and they're like, oh, I really want to join BHF. But we're not BHF. So very, very important to make sure to change the name when you're copy and pasting your essays over. In terms of studying for the interview itself, let's say like you've passed the written application, you've passed the coffee chat stage. You really want to make sure that you're studying the guides. So these are going to be the Breaking into Wall Street guides made by a company called Mergers and Inquisitions. And the main guides that you want to focus on are accounting, equity value and enterprise value, valuation, and discounted cash flows. So if this doesn't really make a lot of sense or you haven't heard these terms before, totally natural. I think I was in the same boat when I first started out, but make sure that you study these guides in depth and can answer those questions at the end. And I'm going to send these out so that you guys have a little bit of a head start and can work on these beforehand. But usually, when you get a final interview invitation, you are given these guides to review. And so that's something that's very, very important. Again, one of the main reasons why candidates do or don't make it into the clubs. And so, to look at it from a very high level, this is kind of what that funnel looks like. So usually there are around 250 or 300 or so students that attend the information session, right? They're eager to learn more. They want to get a better sense for how they can get involved on campus. And so they come to the info sessions, and most people enjoy the info session and choose to apply, but not everyone does. So maybe you have like 200 to 250 applications from that pool of people that went to the info session. I think the number usually works out to be around the same. But yeah, the clubs usually receive hundreds of applications. I think some years can get up to 300, maybe even 400. And from that, there is a pretty rigorous selection process of like which resumes do we want to take to coffee chats. So if the written application looks good, if the resume is well formatted, right? We're not necessarily looking for too much experience, but if it's well formatted and the essays are good, the stock pitch makes sense. Usually we take like maybe like 50 or 70 or so people to coffee chats. And then after coffee chats, that's whittled down to a lower number, usually maybe like between 30 and 40. Although some clubs have been known to take only like 20 final interviews, for example. And then by the end of the process, there's usually only like 5 to 10 offers that are given out. And freshmen will make up the vast majority of these incoming classes, if not the entirety of the class. So from that, we can sort of extrapolate and see only 3 to 4% of applicants receive an offer from that first candidate pool, right? And so it is quite a competitive process. There's many opportunities that you can get cut at. And because of that, I think one policy that sort of emerged over the years is that you can't be a member of several of these top four clubs. So this only applies to BAM, BVI, BHF, and BIT right now, right? So like you can be an SOF and be in BVI, which is actually what I was at some point. But you can't be in BAM, you can't be in BV at the same time. You get into one club, and so there is a prohibition of membership across several organizations. So with that being said, right, you can clearly see here that it's not easy to break into a club. As I mentioned before, during my freshman and fall quarter, I think BAM looked at my resume and decided not to take me to coffee chats. I went to coffee chats for BHF, and I think I got cut after that. And then I was rejected from BVI after final interviews. I think because of that technical question that I missed. And I didn't even realize that I should have applied to BIT. And I think one thing to note is like when you apply to these clubs, make sure to apply to all four. I heard of some students that were like, oh, I didn't apply to BHF because I don't really want to do hedge funds. Vast majority of people in BHF are doing investment banking. In a way, you can sort of treat these clubs as being the same. And I think if you're going to apply to one, you should apply to four. And that's just because it's so difficult to just break into any one club. You really want to boost your odds by just throwing your application to all of them, right? But I think the big point of this slide overall, besides the fact that it's not easy to break into a club, is that a club is a nice to have, but not a need to have, right? So you can get a great offer from an investment bank without being in a club. And at the end of the day, I think that I think that a hardworking non-club student will always recruit better than a less driven club student and vice versa. And I think that's very important, right? So at the end of the day, it's up to your own ambition. It's up to your own sort of desire to break in. And that is independent of whether you're in a club or not, right? So the diagram below, I think, is just like me wanting to emphasize that the students in clubs, they play super well. We have people in Goldman Sachs and Ares or UBS or Bank of America, but we also have people that are outside the clubs at those very same firms at same or different locations. But I think I just wanted to emphasize it is very much possible to break into these amazing firms while not being in a club. So try your hardest to break into a club, but you don't need to break into a club. And I think that can be seen through the stories of Kavin and Cyrus. So Kavin and Cyrus are two current juniors that are on the investment banking committee. So they're actually running the investment banking workshop along with some other people as well. And Cyrus mentions here, he tried to speak with as many professionals and students as possible through cold emailing. He found his internships through LinkedIn and cold emailing people. And most of his prep came from like his friends and asking alumni and other students. And so he was able to make it into Tessera Partners, which is an extremely prestigious and competitive investment bank to get into, just by, pushing things forward on his own and really taking that initiative. Calvin is a really, really similar story. He talked about how he was able to break into JP Morgan just by having the support of other students, and he realized how helpful the network is. And he emphasized this point that surrounding yourself with people who are also recruiting makes a really big difference. And being in programs like the UBS Workshop or the Accelerator, which is sort of like an adjacent program, was very helpful for him in preparing. And so with that, I think it's important to take a step back and think, okay, why are we talking about this now, right? This is very early on. We just started here at UCLA, kind of a lot of information to throw at you. And I think that the reason why I wanted to talk about this and cover this specific content now is because the clubs are in full swing in terms of the recruiting, right? So like right after this session, there's the Bruin Value Investing information session. Um, and so this is going to end like probably within 1 to 2 weeks. And so we really want to make sure that you're positioning yourself to put yourself in the best position to do well. And I think like historically, this information that I've just talked about hasn't really been readily available to a lot of people, especially for me, right? Learning about all the things that I talked about just in this session has needed like years of just like trial and error and figuring things out as I go along. And so some freshman candidates, they have a like information asymmetry, right? Some are in fraternities that help them like literally walk through the entire process. Some people just have the right connections. Some people did a ton of research ahead of time, which is obviously great. But I think that it's nice to have this information out there because it levels the playing field. And it means that, students are more prepared for the club recruiting and finance recruiting process. So, you know, I think also in the bigger picture, right? Recruiting for like your actual internships at these investment banks is also very early, right? Recruiting for internships that, lead to your full-time offer after graduation begins in your sophomore year in your fall or winter quarter. So, the firms have kind of started recruiting so early because they want to just snatch the best talent in the country. And so what this means is that you're going to be recruiting for your junior summer internship, which is the summer after your junior year and before your senior year. And that's the internship that usually leads to a return offer to come back full time after graduation. You recruit for that internship after just 1 year at being at UCLA. So it is very, very early, and it is important to be prepared early on. And those who do prepare early on tend to do the best in that process. So, with that, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I threw a lot of information at you. There's a lot of content that we just covered, but I want all of you to just take a deep breath, relax, and sort of take stock of what we have discussed so far, right? This club recruiting, and investment banking recruiting process can take up a lot of time and mental energy, but I want to emphasize, don't let it take over your life. You're at UCLA. It's a great place in a great city. There are a lot of amazing students here that you can learn so much from and connect with, that you definitely should explore and not just spend all your time, thinking about investment banking and thinking about recruiting for the club. So on the slide here, you can see a couple of great spots in LA that I love personally. So, there are two photos of campus here, which I think, we go to a great school with a very, very beautiful campus. In the bottom right, you have Manhattan Beach, which is just gorgeous. You have Santa Monica in the bottom left. You have, downtown through the 6th Street Viaduct in that top center picture there. And then you've Laguna Beach. I've never personally been yet, but I've always wanted to go. It's Southern California. It seems like a very nice place. So yeah, go out there, explore things, if especially if you're a first year and you're just coming to LA. It's a really, really cool city. Would definitely recommend going out with your friends and looking and exploring, just learning more about what's out there and also learning more about what's available at UCLA. So if you listened to the part about what finance is and why people are interested and none of it resonates with you, feel free to not come to the next session or feel free not to explore this path. I think learning that you want to do banking is equally as important as learning that you don't want to do banking. So make sure to really think critically about your options. But I think the key things that we really want to emphasize here is that finance can be a great path for you, and there are a lot of great reasons to get into the industry. And if you want to recruit from UCLA, the school is as strong as it's ever been in terms of recruiting and placement. In terms of the whole clubs, we talked about that in a lot of detail, but getting into the clubs, that is a nice to have, but it's not a need to have. You can definitely recruit well if you get into a club, but you can also recruit well if you're not in a club. But the most important thing is that you want to start early, you want to work hard. I always want to emphasize that you want to lean on your peers, you want to reach out to upperclassmen. But the most important thing is do not be afraid to ask for help. Um, all of us were freshmen at some point, all of us with investment banking offers, all of us that are taking on leadership positions in the club. So I think because of that we have empathy, or we can relate to people that have just gotten into UCLA and don't really know what's going on. So we will always be open to help. I think that if you were to reach out to any person in the finance community at UCLA, there's a very high chance they'll respond to you if you ask them, hey, are you open to grabbing coffee? Are you open to just chatting through some things? Like even if they've never met you, they'll probably take some time to at least hop on the phone or maybe meet you on campus, to give you a sense of how you can prepare. And so, if any of what I've talked about interests you, even just like a tiny bit, really, really encourage you to give it a try and learn more because, as underclassmen, now is really the time to explore and learn more about what you might be passionate about. And, a point I really wanted to drive home is that the business community at UCLA is quite large. Honestly, there's quite a lot of people. And these are the faces of the people that you're probably going to get to know better over time, right? These are the people that are going to be your mentors. These are the people that are going to support you. These are the people that you're going to network with, if you decide to go through the recruiting process and do coffee chats with investment bankers. And these are the people that will ultimately, be, a very big part of your college experience if you decide to go down this path and learn more about finance. So with that, thank you so much for attending this first session here. It was awesome to meet everybody and learn more. I think in sum, it's finance is a great career path, very interesting, can be very lucrative, can help you understand businesses at a deep level and the flow of capital. If you want to learn about finance through clubs at UCLA, you can look into BAM, Bruin Asset Management, BVI, which is Bruin Value Investing, BHF, Bruin Hedge Fund, or BIT, which is Bruin Investment and Trading Group. And UBS, or the Undergraduate Business Society, serves as an umbrella organization that sort of covers all of these clubs. In our next session next week, we're going to be talking about what bankers do, which firms are out there in the industry, and why people choose to pursue careers in banking. And I really encourage you to be a part of this workshop. And we're going to be in the same room in Young Hall on the 6th at 6 p.m. So I am always around to answer questions, anything that may come up. So please don't hesitate to shoot me like a text or an email if you have something that you're wondering about. And the sessions will be recorded, so you can watch them at any time. And I hope that the information that I presented was helpful. But with that, thank you so much for your time, and please let me know if you guys have any questions or concerns. Thank you.